So today we're going to be looking at the liquidation levels on high block capital. Now, before we get into this and dive into all the different tools and incredible features that high block capital has on their platform, I want to just take a step back and do a little recap of course 1, 2, and 3 and the intro that we gave you to liquidity theory. So course 1, 2, and 3, for someone who wants to learn the basics of technical analysis and really understand that conversation of buyers and sellers, supply and demand, and get a sense of identifying support and resistance through market structure, and then adding in tools like Ichimoku and Fibonacci, scalping strategies on low time frames, and setting up swing trades on high time frames. That is all a visual representation, and it's an illustration on a chart. This fourth course, liquidity theory, is really where we're doing a deeper dive into something that is sentiment based. And when I talk about sentiment, I don't want you to think of what Twitter is saying or what another person is saying about the market. When we're starting to look at sentiment analysis, it's giving us actual data that we can use alongside all of the technical analysis and things we've learned up until this point to make a more educated guess or trade on where we think price is going. Now, as we know, liquidity is important because this market is a bunch of large players controlling price while the retail is at the mercy of their movements. And the goal for us is to figure out where are the larger players, entities, whales, whatever you want to call them, making their next move. And where is price going to potentially go based on this school of thought, liquidity theory. Because ultimately we want to be riding on the backs of these larger players and getting in position to when they're getting in position and we can ride the trend with them. Now, this liquidation level tool is really helping us to identify those potential liquidity pools and where the large orders could be filled, whether that's long or short, by these larger players. And ultimately, we can start to use that in our own trade setups and identify those levels and craft trading strategies around them. So, high block has a tool called liquidation levels. And the way I would describe it is it predicts regions of potential liquidations. And the higher the position size, and we'll get into how we identify that, the higher the hit rate for the liquidation. Now, if you recall back to the BitMEX calculator we showed you, and some examples that Zoran has gone over in the past, you could calculate a liquidation price based on your position size, entry, and your leverage. So this tool is using a predictive model to identify where certain trades at certain times have taken place. And it's applying a leverage component, in this case, 25, 50, or 100x. And it's spitting out a liquidation price and a potential area where that could be a large source of liquidity. Now, I know this is a lot to take in, but bear with me here because we're going to go through this whole thing. I wanted to get into why it's important at first and kind of how all of these things that you've learned have led up to this point. And as we start to look at sentiment analysis, how this is incredibly valuable and gives you kind of that edge that you really need to try and ride on the backs of these larger players. So we can see this as XBT position size. And we can see that this is filterable through 10, 15, and 20. So we can figure out the position sizes we want to look at. Now we know XBT as the perpetual swap product from our financial instruments section, as well as the thorough overview of the BitMEX interface. So let's say for this part of the lesson, we're going to look at a 20 million contract size. Now we skip down here And we can see our price here, and we can see that we have a price chart, and we can see how price is moving along this. But then we have all these little bubbles. And they're colorful and they look great, but let's figure out what they're really telling us and what they mean. So if we go over here to our little legend or key, we can start to kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together. So we can see that this is XBT USD 1 minute. So this is updating every minute on the price. And there are different colors for the bubbles, and they correspond on the chart. But before we can get into the bubbles, I want to focus on this red dot and this green dot. There is a long entry price and a short entry price. And before we look at these bubbles, we need to identify these areas. So as we look on the chart, we can see that there's a red circle here, there's a green circle here, there's a green circle. They're all over the place. Let's just take one in particular. So I look at this red circle, and it says shorts entry price. This is telling me, again, a predictive model, that at this entry, the shorts came into the market. Okay, that's all you need to know right now. If I look above it, I can see that there's bubbles. Now, if I look at the colors of the bubbles, well, let's start with the blue one. Okay, well, that's 25x. This is telling me that at 79.55, size 29.12 million, so we can see that we're looking at our XBT position size, that this is the liquidation price of those shorts that came in right here. If I look at the 50x bubble, look, corresponds the color. Well, those get liquidated at 77.90. Now, if I look at the 100x, I'm just matching the bubble to these colors, and I'm using the red dot as the point of reference to where they came into the market. 77.11. So right now I have three really useful pieces of data based off an entry price, and I can see where the potential liquidations are if price hits them. Now, as we know, these are pockets of liquidity, so maybe larger players are using these to fill their orders. But before we get into that, I just want you to understand how this works. Now, if we go over here, we look at long entry price. Okay, well here, let's look at this. They came into the market right here. So if these are longs, bubbles would be below. That's what a liquidation is. If it's shorts, the bubbles would be above, as we just saw. But now we can see that, well, the position size is 51.99 million. The bubble is bigger, so you can start to see how the size of the bubble is in relation to the actual size here. Longs came into the market. Well, my 100x longs liquidate at 78.51. Now, if I look at the 50x longs, well, they liquidate at 77.74. And my 25x longs, well, they liquidate, as we can see, that matches up at 76.23. So we now have information about longs and shorts and potential liquidation levels based off entries. You're probably saying, why does this matter? Well, it matters a lot because, as we spoke about, we can now start to use our technical analysis with sentiment analysis. So we can now start to identify pockets of liquidity based on these levels. And this is something that we can also mark up on our charts. And then we can say to ourselves, do these liquidation levels match up with a key support and resistance zone, or maybe a DBS or SSR? Then you're really starting to formulate a plan, and it is a strategic approach to how you want to set up trades and figure out where price is potentially going based on liquidity theory. So we can see that we have the different sizes of the bubbles, the different colors of the bubbles. We know that the red is telling us shorts entered there, and the green is telling us longs entered there. So now we have a very good understanding of how this liquidation level tool works, the financial instrument that it's tracking, XBT perpetual swap from BitMEX, and we can start to identify possible areas of liquidity. Now, there is an Ethereum one. I don't trade Ethereum that much. I know people who do, but knowing what you know now, you can apply that to Ethereum, because look, we have our longs entry price, our shorts entry price. While they're different leverage amounts, it's still the same concept. I'm not going to go into Ethereum right now. I wanted to cover why the liquidation level tool is important, how it works, and how we can use it going forward. So now we're going to get into an example of how I mark this out on a chart and figure out where price is potentially going based on these liquidation levels, and how it's a trade setup that we can look at to figure out where we want to position ourselves going forward.